Today, we're taking a trip down memory lane to explore some truly wild habits from 1970s Canada that would absolutely baffle us today. If you grew up in this era, get ready for some serious nostalgia. And if you didn't, buckle up, because you're about to discover just how different daily life was just 50 years ago. Smoking everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Let's start with the big one. In 1970s Canada, smoking wasn't just allowed everywhere, it was practically expected. We're talking about lighting up in hospitals, on airplanes, in shopping malls, restaurants, and even in the office right at your desk. Imagine sitting in a doctor's waiting room while someone puffs away right next to you. Your teacher could smoke in the staff room between classes, and the smell would waft through the hallways. Flight attendants would walk down the aisle of a plane offering passengers cigarettes alongside their beverages. There were ashtrays built into grocery store shopping carts, for crying out loud. Movie theaters had smoking sections, which, let's be honest, just meant the whole theater smelled like smoke. Even more shocking, pregnant women received almost no warnings about smoking, and it wasn't unusual to see a mom-to-be with a cigarette in hand. The idea of designated smoking areas or smoke-free zones, that was still years away from becoming reality. Hitchhiking was totally normal. Picture this. You're standing on the side of the Trans-Canada Highway with your thumb out, and within minutes, a complete stranger pulls over to give you a ride. In the 1970s, this was just how people got around. Hitchhiking was so common that it was considered a legitimate form of transportation, especially for young people and students trying to save money. Parents would let their teenagers hitchhike to part-time jobs or to visit friends in the next town over. It wasn't seen as particularly dangerous, it was just what you did. The Yellow Pages actually listed something called drive-away services, where you could drive someone else's car across the country. And hitchhikers were often picked up to help with the driving. No seatbelts, no car seats, no problem. Climb into the way back of the family station wagon with your siblings and roll around while Dad drives down the highway at 120 kilometers per hour. Sound insane? That was just a regular road trip in 1970s Canada. Seatbelt laws didn't exist for most of the decade, and even after they were introduced, enforcement was lax and compliance was low. Babies were held on their mother's lap in the front seat. Toddlers would stand up on the bench seat between their parents. Kids would lie down in the back window, sit on each other's laps, or play in the cargo area of station wagons with no seats at all. The station wagon facing backward seat was considered the coolest spot in the car, never mind that you had no protection whatsoever in a rear-end collision. Car seats? Those were basically just booster seats that weren't anchored to anything. They were more about giving kids a better view out the window than about safety. Many families didn't even bother with them. Pickup trucks would have kids riding in the open truck bed, wind in their hair, completely exposed to the elements and any potential danger. The first mandatory seatbelt law in Canada wasn't until Ontario introduced one in 1976, and it took years for the rest of the provinces to follow suit. Party lines and phone booth etiquette. Before everyone had a smartphone in their pocket, before cordless phones, even before everyone had their own private phone line, there were party lines. Multiple households would share a single phone line. You'd pick up your phone to make a call and might hear your neighbor already chatting away. Etiquette dictated that you'd quietly hang up and try again later. But here's the thing. People absolutely would eavesdrop on their neighbors' conversations. Small-town gossip traveled fast, partly because Mrs. Henderson down the street was literally listening in on your phone calls. If there was an emergency, you might have to ask your neighbor to get off the line so you could make an urgent call. Phone booths were everywhere, outside every corner store, at gas stations, in restaurant lobbies. Superman had the right idea. These things were on every block. If you were going to be late, you'd need to find a phone booth and have a pocket full of dimes. Kids were taught their home phone number and how to make a collect call in case of emergency. Long-distance calls were expensive, so families would wait until evening or weekend rates kicked in to call relatives in other provinces. Some people would let the phone ring once and hang up, a prearranged signal that meant "I'm thinking of you," without the cost of an actual call. The idea that you could reach anyone, anytime, at any time would have seemed like science fiction. Sunday shopping laws meant everything was closed. In 1970s Canada, the Lord's Day Act meant that on Sundays, almost everything was closed. And I mean everything. No shopping malls, no grocery stores, no department stores. Even many gas stations and restaurants were closed. Sunday was for church and family, and that was pretty much it. If you ran out of milk or bread on a Sunday, too bad. You'd have to wait until Monday or hope you knew someone who worked at one of the few corner stores that might be open for a couple of hours. The streets in cities would be eerily quiet because there was simply nowhere to go and nothing to do that required spending money. This wasn't just tradition, it was law. Businesses that opened on Sundays could be fined. The laws started to relax in different provinces at different times through the late 70s and into the 80s, but for most of the 1970s, Sunday shopping was not an option for most Canadians. For many people, this forced day of rest was welcome. Families spent time together, went for walks, had big Sunday dinners. But for others, especially as society became more diverse and secular, these laws felt restrictive and outdated. Cash was king. No debit, no credit cards. The 1970s ran on cold, hard cash and personal checks. Credit cards existed, but they weren't nearly as common as today. Many stores didn't accept them, and those that did often had minimum purchase amounts. Debit cards? Those wouldn't become widespread in Canada until the 1990s. This meant you had to plan ahead. Going shopping? You'd better stop at the bank first during banking hours, which were roughly 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays only. Banks weren't open on weekends or evenings. If you ran out of cash on a Saturday afternoon, you were out of luck until Monday morning. ATMs started appearing in the late 1970s, but they were rare and often unreliable. The first ATMs in Canada only dispensed cash and couldn't accept deposits. People would line up at the bank on Friday afternoons to cash their paychecks and get enough money to last the weekend. Writing checks at the grocery store was common, and it would slow down the whole checkout process. The cashier would carefully examine your ID, write your driver's license number on the check, and sometimes call the store manager to approve it. Online banking, e-transfers, and paying bills electronically? Completely unimaginable. TV stations signed off at night. Gather round, kids, because this one is wild. In 1970s Canada, television stations would actually stop broadcasting at night. Around midnight or 1 a.m., you'd see the test pattern, that colored bar screen, or maybe a Canadian flag waving while the national anthem played. Then nothing, just static. CBC was often your only option in many parts of Canada, especially in rural areas. If you lived in a bigger city, you might get 3 or 4 channels if you were lucky, and you had to actually get up and turn a dial to change them. Remote controls existed, but weren't standard until the late 70s and early 80s. If you missed your favorite show, that was it. No streaming, no recording, no watching it on demand later. You had to plan your entire evening around the TV schedule printed in the newspaper. Families would actually argue about what to watch because you could only watch one thing on one TV that the whole family shared. Saturday morning cartoons were a sacred ritual because that was the only time cartoons were on. Miss it, and you'd have to wait another whole week. The idea of watching whatever you want, whenever you want, on a device you carry in your pocket would have seemed like pure magic. Milk was delivered to your door in glass bottles. Every morning, the milkman would arrive in his truck before dawn and leave fresh milk in glass bottles right on your doorstep. You'd leave your empty bottles out the night before, and they'd be replaced with full ones. The milk would sit outside for hours before you brought it in all weather, and somehow nobody worried too much about it spoiling or being contaminated. The glass bottles had thick cream that would rise to the top, and you'd shake the bottle to mix it back in, unless you wanted to skim that cream off for your coffee or to make whipped cream. Some people would leave notes for their milkman to adjust their order or to add other items like cream, butter, or eggs. This wasn't just in small towns. Major Canadian cities had milk delivery services well into the 1970s. The milkman was a figure of the neighborhood, knew everybody, and would sometimes let kids take short rides on his truck. The bottles were reused over and over, making it an early form of recycling and sustainability that we've somehow lost. The decline of milk delivery came as supermarkets expanded, refrigerators got bigger and could store more, and families started buying everything in one weekly shopping trip rather than having daily deliveries. Kids roamed free, no supervision required. Speaking of freedom, children in 1970s Canada experienced a level of independence that would probably get parents arrested today. Kids as young as 5 or 6 would leave the house in the morning and not come back until the streetlights came on. No cell phones, no GPS tracking, no constant check-ins, just be home for dinner. Parents had no idea where their kids were for hours at a time, and that was perfectly normal. Kids would bike across town to visit friends, play in construction sites, build forts in the woods, and explore storm drains. Looking back at these habits from 1970s Canada, it's incredible how much has changed in just 50 years. Some of these changes have clearly been for the better. Seatbelts and car seats save lives, and not having smoke everywhere is definitely an improvement for public health. But there's something bittersweet about the loss of other things. The freedom kids had to explore, the slower pace of life, the face-to-face connections that happened more naturally without screens. What's fascinating is that none of these things seemed strange at the time. They were just normal, everyday life. Which makes you wonder, what are we doing now that will seem absolutely insane to people 50 years from now? What habits and technologies will our grandchildren look back on and shake their heads in disbelief? If you lived through the 1970s in Canada, drop a comment below with your memories of this era. What do you miss? What are you glad is gone? And if you're younger, which of these habits surprised you the most? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.